Let's define some terms, first of all. A union is a democratic institution that exists typically within a workplace. Its leadership is elected by a majority of its membership. Its policies are determined by a majority of its membership. And it can cease to exist if 51% of its members say that we want this union decertified. The union bargains on behalf of the workers with the employer and represents the workers, and is required by law, in fact, to have attorneys represent the lawyers in any disputes with individual, like, bad bosses kind of things. And the union charges dues for that, or if people choose not to be a member, they charge a fee because they are required by law to represent every single person who is, in this case, a California teacher. Unions are also the principal supporters of the Democratic Party, the largest supporters, whereas it's corporations and billionaires who are the principal supporters of the Republican Party, which I think explains why Ronald Reagan, when he came into office and we had almost a third of the American workforce unionized, started his war on organized labor. That war continues now in California. And Tim Sandifer is the principal attorney with PFL's, the Pacific Legal Foundation's national headquarters, the website pacificlegal.org, a conservative, think tank, would you call it, Tim?
We like to call ourselves an action tank. We don't write policy reports. We sue the government.
Right. So why do you hate teachers?
Yeah, well, because I hate children, right? No, the reason is...
It's a serious question.
Well, it's not a fair question, because what we're talking about is defending the rights of teachers who don't want to be forced to subsidize union political activities with which they disagree.
By law, they're not forced to. By law, they can opt out.
That's right, but the rule should not be an opt-out.
So if that's right, then why not just leave it the way it is?
Requirement. So imagine, for example, that there was a law that said, I'm going to force you to put a Republican candidate for president bumper sticker on your car and charge you for that unless you opt out. Well, that wouldn't be fair, even if we're talking about just a quarter.
But that's not what we're talking about here.
People's freedom of speech that way.
That's not what we're talking about. Although I will grant you, Tim, that I think your argument that that with regard to political activity for unions, people should be able to opt out automatically and they have to opt in or something like that, which is what you want, is probably your strongest argument. But the other argument that you're making, which is that people shouldn't have to pay these what are called agency fees. In other words, people who are getting benefits from the union but don't want to pay union dues at all, still have to pay basically a minimum agency fee of something that might be in the neighborhood of between $30 and $100 a month, that they shouldn't have to pay for the representation that the union is required by law to provide them. That is just naked union busting that you guys are promoting, Tim.
Well, we're talking, first of all, about public sector unions, and I want to talk to you about this seriously because I think this is somewhere where you and I actually could find common ground. Because remember that the Democratic Party has a long tradition of being skeptical of public sector unions, because what you're talking about with public sector unions is people who are benefiting, they're paid out of tax dollars, and then turning around and lobbying the government to spend more tax dollars. And all of these tax dollars come from the paychecks of working class people who are forced to pay for these employees. So a democratic society ought to be really skeptical of an institution that creates a government class whose interests are contrary to the interests of working people.
Your argument is predicated on the assumption that government employees are not workers like all the rest of us.
No,
government employees have bad bosses.
I did not say that at all.
I mean, to the extent to which, well, Tim, let me just finish this thought if I can. The extent to which you guys say, government is evil, government is horrible, I would think that if you really believe that rhetoric, that you would absolutely want any employee of government to have the strongest protections possible from that evil government. And the union, we know, is the strongest worker protection that is possible in the United States of America right now.
Well, first of all, I never said that government is evil or awful. And secondly,
but I've had people from Pacific Legal Foundation assert similar things.
The Constitution of the United States, and in particular the First Amendment, which protects a person's right not to be forced to subsidize political institutions that they disagree with. And a public sector union that engages in collective bargaining is fundamentally lobbying. There's no difference between public sector.
This is not a free speech issue, Tim. These people they have a job. There's an employment contract. That employment contract was negotiated by the union. We're talking contract law here, not some grand abstraction that has to do with the First Amendment, which doesn't say anything about unions, by the way.
I disagree. I think when a person is forced to pay money to subsidize union political activities, that is a fundamental.
They are not forced to pay for union political activities.
That's not true.
What they are forced to pay for is the union representing them on their behalf in negotiations with their employer or in disputes with their employers.
Government, and the negotiation consists of lobbying.
No, it consists of defending workers. That's not lobbying.
I'm sure that they perceive it that way, but we're talking about the rights of dissenters.
You're inventing a new language here. You're saying that if a union, if I'm a government employee and a union, and I have a complaint about my boss is harassing me or something, and I go to the union and I say, I want your lawyer to come in and file something against this, you're suggesting that that's lobbying?
I'm saying that when the California Teachers Association goes to the legislature and asks them to increase the government spending on government schools,
that's a completely different thing. That is the part
that exactly the same.
No, it's not. That's the part that's the part that individual union members can opt out of paying into.
I understand what you're saying, but
I'm talking about agency fees. I'm talking about being represented.
Right,
and your attempts to conflate these two are admirable, but they're wrong.
The problem with the public sector unions situation is you can't make that clean distinction like you can with private sector unions. With public sector unions, when they go to the government and lobby in behalf of more government spending for government programs that are staffed by their union members, that's a political position. There really is no way of making that distinction.
And that lobbying is
on the side of freedom of speech.
And good Republicans who think that we should have no government and to hell with Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and no more EPA and everything else just bring all the food in from China and let them eat dirt. Republicans who are committed to that, I get it, don't want there to be unions.
Well, now, wait a minute. What I've been saying has been party line Franklin Roosevelt this entire time. That's exactly what FDR's position was in opposing public sector unions, precisely because they are fundamentally cartels that are organized against the interests of taxpayers who ought
actually
to be
they weren't at the time. He was concerned that they may become that, and we changed our mind on that. It was in the 60s, was it not?
That's right.
During the LBJ administration.
So what I'm saying is let's return to the true democratic faith.
No, you're not. You're not saying that at all. What you're saying is you want to destroy unions because they support Democrats, and you want to cut off the money line to the Democrats at the same time that billionaires who support everything from right-wing think tanks to right-wing politicians are on the march.
One little correction, because I agree with you that I'm trying to stop the unions, the Democratic unions' money supply, but only because that money supply is forcibly taken from the people against their will. If this were money that were voluntarily contributed to the Democratic
contract,
Party,
Tim,
that would be protected by the First Amendment.
If you work in a unionized,
taken against the will of workers from their paychecks and then given to political causes,
are their taxes taken against their will?
Yes, they are. And
are my taxes? So, are you suggesting that I should not? I disagree with George W. Bush spending $2 trillion on two stupid wars. Should I be allowed to not pay my taxes?
No, that's not what we're talking about.
Yes, it is.
Speech. We're talking, and if you want to,
no, my government is here to protect and defend me. My government runs the police department and the fire department.
We're accustomed to from you progressives. What I'm talking about here is freedom of speech. If you're talking about whether the government can use taxpayer money to take a political position, the answer is no.
George W. Bush took my taxpayer dollars and used it to lie to the American people about Saddam Hussein and led us into a war that cost us $1 trillion. Why do I have to pay taxes for that?
First Amendment rights of workers. I didn't realize this was about Saddam Hussein.
Well, I guess you. It's okay. We've wandered far afield. Timothy Sandifer, principal attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation. PacificLegal.org is the website. The Twitter is @Timothy Sandifer, SANDEFUR, and @Pacific Legal. Thanks a lot, Tim.
Thank you.
Good talking.